So I am here with my fellow executive coach, leadership coach, friend and colleague, Elizabeth Lovius. And we're going to talk today and explore the topic of relationships. So we're really going to explore the keys behind relationships, how they work, when they work, how they don't, and really understand a little bit about what makes us tick. So great to be with you here, Elizabeth. So why don't you just start off by giving your overall feeling about relationships and what we might be up against in relationship?
Oh, great question. Thank you. Well, I often think when it comes to relationships, we often have the thought, what's going on? What is going on? And we're often mystified, aren't we, by other people and what we're witnessing. And I think I just like to start off with that, that we're going on along in life and we're noticing whatever we're noticing about other people, but really what we're seeing is the tip of the iceberg. It's just we're just seeing their behavior. That's all we're seeing. And we walk along and we observe their behavior, and there's immediately in us a whole story about what that behavior means, why they're doing it, where it's coming from, and what the purpose of their behavior is. And I think we kind of innocently doing that, trying to make sense of the world and other people. But really, there's so much we're not seeing. There's so much we don't know. There's so much that is invisible to us about their behavior, but also in us. When we're making those calls about, that behavior is inappropriate, or I don't like it when they talk to me like that. There's a lot that's going on inside of us at the same time that we're not aware of too. So I guess my opening line is there's so much that's invisible and hidden when we're interacting with other people. And it's just really useful to take that into account.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. So I've got this image of two icebergs, right? There's them, and then there's me. And we both got our icebergs going on. And the icebergs is just the behaviors at the top. And then there's everything that's going on for them that I don't know about in the moment, that they've had a bad day because of X. But underneath the iceberg, there's also all the thinking and beliefs and values they've got and who they grew up to be and how they grew up, that's shaping also how they come across. And then I've got the same stuff going on. And we're often in conflict in relationships because we're not really seeing underneath the iceberg what's going on, the impact it's having. Amazing. But the other thing that struck me, Elizabeth, is the role that judgment plays. And judgment. I see your behaviors on the tip of the surface, and without even consciously thinking about, I wonder what's going on for her today, I wonder how she is, I wonder why she did that, how quickly we move into judging, criticizing.
Thinking we know. Because like you say, underneath that iceberg is what I call the cultural context into which we were born. 0 to 7 years, we are sponges. I think you're well aware that we learn brilliantly 0 to 7. We're natural born learners. We absorb, we take in everything. We don't evaluate, we don't judge. We're just sponges for information and learning. And we don't even reject anything that comes our way. That's how we learn to walk and talk. And so innocently, we're absorbent, taking in, learning to walk and talk, taking in everything. And that's our cultural context. So if you learn at a very young age that you say please and thank you, that's just what you do in whatever language you learn it in. Or you learn you don't say please and thank you. That's just what you don't do. So it's all very kind of innocent and designed that way, very healthy for us to be very absorbent learners. But I think what then happens is we take on board implicit judgments and cultural norms and expectations of those around us, because they're our caregivers and it makes sense to follow their lead without doing, and what we're observing from them, we don't fit. And that's really important when you're little. You need people to look after you. So it makes sense. So that whole system is perfectly designed. But what can creep in is some beliefs, like you say, and some values and some stories about how we are and how life is that we never question. But they're underneath the surface, influencing, our beliefs, values are influencing every day our thoughts and behaviors and our feelings. So it's really quite fascinating when you think, like you say, that there's two icebergs interacting with all of this story that they've, without even aware that they're living in a judgmental story, like you say, or a critical story. So I think that, that's a really good thing to know when you're relating with other people, that there's a whole piece there that you don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, the insight I have is autopilot, is how much it's so easy, so much of our time to be living in autopilot, on autopilot. So judging you, being angry with you, or frustrated with you, or loving you, or thinking you're amazing, whatever it is, it's not just bad. But it feels like I'm choosing that at the time, but really it's just an autopilot based upon what's going on under the iceberg. And so it's not considered conscious behavior, it's autopilot behavior. Yeah. Some of which could be good and loving towards you, but some of which could not. Either way, it's this autopilot.
Yeah. And it's like you said earlier, we're all kind of operating on autopilot.
Yeah.
Not knowing we are, and mistaking that for our true self. And I think we're going to talk more about that as we go through this little series about, what really is who we are and what is the temporary autopilot automatic response. And they're not the same thing at all. Yeah.
Can I ask you a question about your work in organizations?
Yeah.
As a lead in leadership, I mean, this is a massive question, but I'm interested in where and how you see this showing up. That might be too broad a question.
I like the question. I'll go with that. I love that question. I mean, as you know, we both do a lot of work at board level on top teams. And it's so visible to me that there is an automatic pilot energy on the board. There's 6 different people who can all experience the same board meeting in 6 different ways, through their own lenses, through their own filters. You can see people take offense to a particular, I don't know if you've had this a lot on your board sessions, but somebody doesn't like a particular turn of phrase because in their mind and in their world, that turn of phrase has significance and it's something that they don't like. I think I've done quite a lot of values sessions. I think you have as well, where we try and facilitate the group to align on values. And then there's a word like pioneering, and somebody hates that word because of the meaning associated with pioneering, and somebody else loves that word. And so it's so interesting how everybody's bringing on a board meeting their whole backstory. But again, it's autopilot. So what's really coming to mind is a very specific situation between a founder and his MD. And I'm often in that situation facilitating something between a founder and an MD. And there was something in the story of the MD about being spoken to in a certain way there was there was a traumatic experience in his past. And so whenever the founder used a certain tone of voice and a certain tone of phrase, got impatient in a particular way, it was visible how much the MD would react not to the founder, although ostensibly to the founder, but to something in his own story, in his own past, that he was reminded of in that moment. And that's often what's going on all the time in board meetings, in life, is we're not responding to what's in front of us. We're responding to something in our own experience, in our own story, that looks real to us in that moment, something triggered.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing that was dawning on me as you were speaking is then what, of course, is also under the iceberg is this is in relationships across the board, but across the board, excuse the pun, but also in boards and leadership teams, is under the iceberg is all the thinking that the founder has created about the MD and vice versa. They've worked together for 3 years, let's say. And so what they're also caught up in is this massive story that says he's like this or she's like that. Mm. So when founder says X, Y, Z, the MD, it's like it's going through a filter where it's got to get through this filter. The MD can't really hear it because he or she is caught up in the story, of why the person would be saying it that way, or what they're like, or they're saying it because they don't trust me, or they're saying it because of this or that, and so on and so on. So this iceberg becomes like vast because we're building up so much about each other and who we are or why we're saying things.
I think that's absolutely on the money. And one of the things I often talk to people about in my work is the nature of story and how it is all a story. We are creating our story moment by moment, and we're creating it based on everything that's under the iceberg, what's showing up in our minds in any given moment. But it is all a creation in the moment, and the nature of it is to look real. So we believe our story, and we don't relate to it like it's just a story. We relate to it as if it's the truth. And when we relate to it as the truth, then of course that's when we act in alignment with that inverted commas truth. And that is what becomes our behavior. And then that's what you see on the tip of the iceberg, is the behavior that is consistent with what we believe to be true in the moment. And that is ultimately a story. And I think it might be really fascinating for us, maybe on our next session, to go deeper into, well, what is this thing called the stories we tell ourselves? What's it made of? How does it work? And what are the implications of that for people? Sound like a good next subject for us?
Awesome. I'm thinking of, you might have to remind me of the film with the fish who's got a very bad memory. Do you
Finding Nemo?
Finding Nemo, yeah. Is it Dory the fish?
Yeah.
No memory whatsoever. And I'm thinking this, in our experience, we've known each other for many years. And so we've got a story about each other.
Yeah.
On all of those experiences over years and years and years. Whether it's a good or bad story or a bad story, it's irrelevant. It's just a story. Mm. And what the story does is it prevents us from showing up truly present, receive whoever's showing up in this moment now, regardless of any of that past. It's like, for me, that this is all about presence. How do I show up and receive you and listen to you and understand you for who you are right now in this moment right now?
Yeah. What's beyond the story? Yeah, I love that. So I look forward to exploring this with you on our next session.
Wonderful. Thanks, Elizabeth. It's been great to hang out with you.
Yeah.
So, Elizabeth, what should people, we're obviously doing this to encourage people to think about their own relationships. What would you invite them to reflect on after this conversation?
Well, why don't you have a little reflection on what's under the iceberg for you? What kind of cultural norms did you just take as normal and still do, maybe, that were just something that was an agreement in the culture that you lived in, and it was just how things were? And just start reflecting on which of those do we want to keep because they feel good and we enjoy them, and which of them feel like maybe not out of date or a burden in some way. Start kind of questioning what is for you, and maybe what is it time to let go of, because that's an opportunity that we'll talk more about next time, about how we create these stories. But we don't have to be stuck with any story. So start reflecting on the ones you have. Which ones do you want to keep? Which ones do you want to let go of?
Thank you. Wonderful.